Think back to the last argument that left you quietly stunned. Someone speaking fast, loud, certain, no facts, no experience, no real reasoning. Yet their confidence fills the room and yours starts to shrink. You feel it in your chest before you can name it. How can someone know so little and sound so sure? You've heard the label for this, a neat psychological term people use to feel smarter after the fact. But pause for a second. What if the label is the least important part? Arthur Schopenhauer noticed this long before psychology gave it a name. He didn't study it in labs. He watched it unfold in lecture halls, salons, and corridors of power. Average minds speaking with final authority. Shallow thinkers dismissing deeper ones with a wave of the hand. Not because they were malicious, because they literally couldn't see the gap. Here's the uncomfortable part. Confidence doesn't always come from understanding. Sometimes it comes from its absence. Try a small experiment. Think of a topic you barely know. Notice how clean your opinions feel. No friction, no hesitation. Now compare that to something you've studied for years. Suddenly there are caveats, conditions, doubt, not weakness, weight. This is the split most people miss. Certainty feels like strength. But doubt is often the cost of depth. Schopenhauer wasn't interested in insulting anyone. He was mapping a mechanism. When knowledge is thin, the mind has nothing to push back against itself. No internal resistance. So confidence grows unchecked, not earned, unchallenged. And here's where it gets personal. Every confidently wrong person felt exactly as right as you do now. They weren't pretending, they weren't lying, they were blind, and blindness feels like clarity from the inside. This isn't about spotting fools in a crowd. That's easy, comforting. The harder question is quieter. Where are you most certain and least informed? Because the real danger isn't ignorance, it's ignorance that feels complete. Freedom comes from noticing the difference. Comfort comes from ignoring it. So the next time certainty feels effortless, ask yourself one thing. Is this knowledge? Or is this just noise that hasn't been challenged yet? And if that question makes you uneasy, good. That's where the real work begins. Picture this. You watch someone perform a skill you've never tried. It looks clean, simple, almost obvious. You think, I could do that. That thought feels harmless, but it lands closer to home than you expect, because you've had it more times than you remember. So have I. Here's the uncomfortable part. The feeling of this is easy rarely comes from ability. It comes from not seeing what's missing. Try a small test. Remember the first time you actually attempted something you respected. Writing, lifting, coding, playing an instrument. The moment your hands touched reality, the illusion cracked. Suddenly there were layers, timing, judgment, trade-offs. What looked flat became deep. That shock wasn't failure. It was vision turning on. Now shift the frame. Not as a theory, as an experiment. Notice what happens to confidence as complexity becomes visible. The more you see, the slower you speak. The more you know, the more careful your claims become. This is the divide. Ignorance feels light. Understanding has weight. Schopenhauer watched this pattern play out constantly. People who never went far enough to hit resistance stayed relaxed, certain, loud, final. They dismissed entire systems with a sentence, not because they had examined them, but because nothing inside them said, wait. And here's where it gets sharp. They never reach the moment where the gap appears, the moment where you realize how far you are from mastery. Without that moment, there's no friction. Without friction, certainty feels earned. Look around now. A headline becomes expertise. A documentary becomes authority. A podcast becomes diagnosis. Surface information feels complete because depth is invisible. That's the trap. Essential knowledge creates doubt. Noise creates confidence. And the practical value here isn't spotting confident people. That's easy. The real leverage is internal. When something feels obvious, ask yourself one question. Is it simple? Or is the complexity just outside my vision? Because the instant you start seeing layers, certainty fades. And something more useful replaces it. We're not done yet. Watch what happens when a simple sentence spreads fast. It lands clean. No friction, no effort. People nod before they think. You've done it too. That's the risk Schopenhauer was pointing at. Writing for those who don't look twice guarantees an audience. Not because the message is strong, but because depth and surface feel identical when you can't see below. Here's the uncomfortable hit. When something is easy to understand, it feels true. And the mind quietly swaps comfort for accuracy. Try a small experiment. Ask someone about a hard subject, money, power, history, the mind. Notice the speed of the answer. If it comes fast, clean, and final, with no hesitation, no "it depends," that's not mastery speaking. That's blindness wearing confidence. This isn't an insult, it's a pattern. Flip the frame. Knowledge doesn't erase uncertainty, it creates it. The more ground you cover, the more edges you see. The less you know, the smoother everything looks. That's the split. Certainty versus clarity. Noise versus structure. Schopenhauer called this the illusion of understanding. You recognize the words, you've heard the phrases, you can follow the conversation. So your mind checks the box and moves on. But recognition isn't control, and exposure isn't depth. Here's where it gets personal. Think of the last topic you felt confident about without ever testing it. No application, no failure, no resistance, just ideas passing through. That's familiarity. Expertise only shows up when ideas push back, when they break under pressure, when exceptions appear. You see this everywhere. A few clips, a few quotes. Now someone is teaching a philosophy they've never practiced, speaking in absolutes about systems they've never touched. Comfort loves simplicity. Freedom demands friction. So the real question isn't who sounds confident, it's where confidence arrives too easily. Because when understanding deepens, certainty weakens. And something more precise takes its place. We're still moving toward that. Watch the pause when a simple question is asked. Not a trick question. Just one step past the quotes. What does Stoicism actually do with external goods? How is it different from Epicurus? Silence, a blank look. Then a confident recovery built from fragments. You've seen this, you've done this. Because recognizing words feels close enough to knowing them. And that's the dangerous comfort. Schopenhauer ran into this constantly. Colleagues would drop his terms into conversation, use his language, reference his ideas. For a moment, it sounded like understanding. Then one sentence would land wrong. Not a small mistake. A miss of the core. They weren't lying. They were familiar. And familiarity is persuasive when no one pushes deeper. Shift the frame for a second. Not as criticism, as a test. Notice how often exposure replaces effort. Scroll for 5 minutes. Neuroscience, politics, psychology, philosophy. You've heard the words, seen the arguments, absorbed the tone. And the mind quietly concludes, I know this. That's the split. Exposure versus comprehension. Comfort versus freedom. Marcus Aurelius warned about this without sounding dramatic. What you hear is opinion. What you see is perspective. But when depth is missing, opinion hardens into fact. Perspective turns into truth. Here's the uncomfortable turn. The moment you feel informed, learning slows down. Why dig deeper into something you already get? So the surface becomes home. Confidence grows. Understanding doesn't. That's the mechanism. Recognition masquerading as knowledge. Familiarity wearing the mask of mastery. There's a simple pressure test for this. Before you speak with certainty, pause. Could you teach this without notes? Could you answer the next question that comes? If that question makes you hesitate, good. That hesitation is not weakness. It's the edge where real understanding begins. And we're not done with that edge yet. Notice what happens when you ask yourself a hard question. Could I defend this if an expert pushed back? Could I use it in a new situation without copying anyone? If the answer is no, there's a quiet truth there. You've seen the idea. You haven't earned it. That lands closer than we like because familiarity feels warm. It feels finished. And it tempts you to stop. Now shift the frame. Not as judgment, as a test. Watch how the mind reacts when it can't tell quality apart. A child watches a chess grandmaster. All they see are pieces moving. No strategy, no sacrifice, no timing, just motion. Someone without musical training hears a virtuoso and a decent player. Both sound good, so both feel equal. This is the cut Schopenhauer made. To recognize excellence, you need a minimum level of skill yourself. Below that line, everything blurs. That's the divide. Perception versus blindness. Freedom versus comfort. Here's the uncomfortable turn. If you can't see excellence, you don't know what to aim for. And if you don't know what to aim for, improvement stalls. Not once. Forever. Schopenhauer watched this in students. They read Kant. They read a casual essay online. To them, both were just opinions. Same category, same weight. They weren't mocking depth. They couldn't see it. And this pattern didn't stay in universities. It scaled. Today, a study and a blog post feel equal. Analysis and confidence blur together. A sharp argument and a smooth voice sound the same. So when someone produces shallow work, it feels complete to them. Not because they're arrogant, because from their position, it really is. Here's the leverage. The moment you start noticing gaps, comparison becomes possible. Aspiration becomes visible. So ask yourself again, can I spot what's better than my work? And if not, what might I be missing? That's where the next shift begins. Watch someone submit work they're clearly proud of. They hit send without hesitation. No second look, no doubt. You've felt that confidence before. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes that confidence doesn't come from clarity. It comes from not seeing what's missing. Shift the frame for a moment. Not as criticism, as an experiment. Ask what happens when skill is required just to notice skill. Navel pointed at this quietly. Some knowledge can't be trained. If anyone can be trained to do it, anyone can replace you. But that kind of knowledge is invisible from the outside. To an untrained eye, all work looks roughly the same. Surface patterns line up. Structure, rigor, pressure. Those signals don't register. Take a simple case. Someone writes an essay. They read it back and it feels solid. Like the others they've seen. So they submit it, even feel proud. An expert reads the same pages and sees breaks everywhere. Claims without support. logic that collapses under light pressure, transitions that don't carry weight, questions that were never faced. The distance between those two views is enormous. But here's the catch. Seeing that distance requires the very skill that's missing. That's the core, not delusion, blindness. Schopenhauer hinted at this with precision. Talent hits a target others miss. Genius hits a target others don't even notice. And some people never see a target at all. To them, showing up feels like success. This is where it sharpens. Not all blindness is simple. Some of it wears complexity, big words, dense language, obscure references stacked together. It sounds impressive, so it feels intelligent. But complexity can hide emptiness as easily as it can reveal depth. Sometimes better, because simple errors stand out. Complicated ones blend in. That's the real split. Structure versus noise, vision versus comfort. And the practical edge is this. Before trusting confidence, yours or anyone else's, ask what's actually being seen. The surface, or the gaps underneath. Because the moment you start noticing those gaps, you're closer to the target than you think, and we're not finished with that yet. Listen to the room when someone starts speaking in heavy language, long sentences, dense words, confident tone, heads nod, few questions. You've been in that room. You might have nodded too. Here's the uncomfortable moment. Sounding intelligent often replaces being understood. And most people don't notice the swap. Shift the frame. Not as criticism, as a quick experiment. Take a sentence that sounds impressive and strip it down. What's left when the language is gone? Someone says something like, the paradigmatic instantiation of post-structural dialectics exposes contradictions in hegemonic frameworks. It feels serious, academic, safe. But pull the cover off. It just means looking closely at modern ideas shows problems in dominant stories. Same idea, different costume. That's the divide. Clarity versus camouflage. Understanding versus noise. Schopenhauer saw this constantly. Papers packed with technical terms, sentences stacked inside sentences, references to books few had read. He would peel them apart and find nothing. No pressure, no insight. Just recycled thoughts wearing expensive language. He noticed something sharper. People were consuming ideas but never digesting them. They collected complexity, then repeated it, believing repetition was intelligence. That pattern didn't disappear. It scaled. Today it walks on stages, bright lights, smooth delivery. Neuroscience terms dropped with confidence. Frameworks borrowed. Studies cited but never touched. The audience feels informed, inspired, certain they witnessed brilliance. Here's where the test begins. Ask for the mechanism. Ask how it works under pressure. Ask how it survives expert pushback. Ask how it changes in a new situation. Watch the pause. Watch the structure collapse. Because what was performed wasn't understanding. It was complexity as theater. This is the dangerous inversion. If something is unclear, it must be deep. If it's simple, it must be naive. Marcus Aurelius cut through that quietly. If you can't explain something plainly, you don't own it, not yet. But the inversion feels safer. If I can't explain it, maybe it's just advanced. Maybe I'm standing near genius. That belief is comfortable. Clarity is not. Here's the practical edge. Real understanding can move. It can compress. It can expand. It adjusts to the listener without losing structure. Noise can't do that. It only stacks higher. So the next time complexity impresses you, pause. What is actually being shown here? Depth or just distance? Because when intelligence is real, it doesn't hide. It translates. And we're still not at the core of that yet. Watch what happens when someone is asked a simple question. Not hostile, not clever, just simple. They pause. Then they start adding layers. You've seen this move. You may have used it. Here's the uncomfortable edge. Complexity is a perfect hiding place. If you stay dense enough, no one can see what you don't understand. So shift the frame. Not as a judgment, as a test. Ask them to say the same thing, but plainly. Same idea, fewer words. If they can do it, something real is there. If they can't, and instead circle back with new jargon, that's not depth. That's performance. Schopenhauer knew this well. He spent years stripping difficult ideas down, making them clean, direct, usable. His peers hated it. Philosophy, they said, should be hard to understand. Difficulty was proof of seriousness, but he saw the mistake. Hard to understand is not the same as deep. Sometimes the deepest insight feels obvious, but only after you've earned it. Complexity often isn't intelligence. It's confusion in formal clothing. Here's where it turns frustrating. Some people can't be corrected, not because they're stubborn, because they lack the structure needed to receive correction. Correction requires one thing first: seeing the gap between what you believe and what is. If you can't see that gap, nothing gets in. Evidence feels like opinion. Logic feels like overthinking. Facts feel biased. That's the closed loop Schopenhauer described. Ignorance blocks perception. Blocked perception protects ignorance. Think of an argument you've had like this. You bring data. It's dismissed. You explain calmly. It's waved off. You simplify. You're told you're missing the point. Every tool fails. Not because the tools are weak, because there's no receiver. It's like sending a clear signal to a device that can't decode it. The message is fine. The system isn't built to accept it. Schopenhauer lived inside this problem. Academic debates where he laid out careful arguments only to watch them slide off untouched. That's the trap. Not disagreement, inaccessibility. And here's the open question that matters. How do you avoid becoming closed like that yourself? How do you build the ability to see gaps before someone else has to point them out? Because the real advantage isn't winning arguments, it's staying open enough to change. And we haven't reached the most dangerous part yet. Watch how the conversation breaks. You point out the mistake. They don't adjust it. They reshape your words into something easier to attack. You've seen this happen, you've been trapped in it. Here's the uncomfortable part. When misunderstanding is complete, correction feels like an attack. Not because the truth hurts, but because it can't be processed. Schopenhauer ran into this constantly. He'd explain his position carefully. His opponent would reply to a version he never held. When he pointed that out, nothing changed, because recognizing a misreading requires the very training they didn't have. So they did the only thing available. They doubled down. With confidence, shift the frame. Not as a debate problem, as a systems problem. Two people aren't disagreeing. They're operating in different languages. The modern version plays out every minute online. Someone makes a claim, you bring evidence, they ignore it and repeat the claim. You name the flaw in the reasoning. They don't know what that flaw is, so they feel attacked. And defense replaces thought. Naval once said, desire is a contract you sign with yourself to be unhappy. Apply that here. The desire to be right is a contract to never learn, because learning has a cost. You have to admit error, and to admit error, you have to see it. If you can't see the gap between belief and reality, wrongness doesn't exist. Only opposition does. Now push this to the extreme. Think of someone convinced the earth is flat. You show images from space, they're fake. You explain physics, they don't understand physics, so it's dismissed. Just theory. You point to ships vanishing over the horizon. They reinterpret it, perspective, tricks, illusion. Nothing gets through. Not because the evidence is weak, but because accepting it would destroy the only framework they have. And they can't abandon that framework. It's all they know. That's the lock. Once it closes from the inside, nothing enters. Schopenhauer warned about this in a darker way. Most people give up the ability to change just to belong, but some go further. They give up the ability to revise themselves at all. This is the hard truth. You cannot reason someone out of a position they never reasoned into. No amount of facts can open a door that's been sealed deliberately. The real leverage isn't persuasion, it's prevention. So the open question isn't how to win arguments, it's how to avoid locking yourself into a framework you can't escape. Because once that lock clicks, confidence feels permanent, and the cost comes later. Watch how nothing gets through. You bring facts, they slide off. You offer context. It's ignored. Not resisted, not debated, just not received. You've been there. And if you're honest, you've been on both sides of that wall. Here's the uncomfortable shift. When confidence is built on ignorance, evidence can't touch it. Not because the evidence is weak, because there's no structure to absorb it. Schopenhauer noticed this early. Some people aren't unreachable because they're stubborn. They're unreachable because they're not equipped to revise themselves. Trying to correct them doesn't enlighten them. It exhausts you. So pause and reframe this, not as a personality flaw, as a system. What looks like arrogance is something colder, blindness. They don't know what they don't know. They confuse exposure with mastery. They can't spot higher skill. They hide behind complexity. They reject correction. They surround themselves with agreement. Each piece locks into the next. A closed structure, comfortable, reinforced, sealed. And here's the hard part. They aren't pretending. They truly believe they're intelligent. From inside the structure, nothing contradicts them. Schopenhauer put it sharply. Talent hits what others miss. Genius sees what others don't even notice. But some people never see that there are targets at all. They think moving through life is the same as aiming. Now comes the dangerous question. How do you know you're not doing the same thing? Because every person trapped in that structure feels exactly as certain as you do right now, especially in the moments you're wrong. So what breaks the loop? Not humiliation, not debate, not more information, doubt. Not the kind that freezes you, the kind that moves you. The quiet habit of asking, what might I be missing? Who sees further than I do? What evidence would force me to change? These questions feel uncomfortable. That's why they work. Certainty protects ignorance. Doubt exposes it. Intelligent people live slightly unsettled. They trade comfort for range. Idiots choose comfort and call it clarity. Naval once said the modern devil is cheap dopamine and the modern angel is free education. Add one more layer. The modern idiot is the one who chooses dopamine over learning and calls the choice wisdom. So here's the real challenge. Not to spot confident ignorance in others, but to notice the moment certainty feels safest in you. That moment is the doorway, and what you do next decides which side of the wall you stay on. Think of one belief you hold without hesitation. something you feel settled about, certain, finished. You have it. And yes, this is personal. Now here's the uncomfortable move. For the next few days, don't defend it, stress it. Actively search for the strongest objections you can find, not weak ones you can brush away, not caricatures, real pressure. This isn't about winning, it's an experiment. Notice what happens when you read arguments that don't flatter your position. If you can't find any, that's already a signal. You're not digging deep enough. If you find them but feel the urge to dismiss them fast, to explain them away, to protect your certainty, pause there. That reaction matters. Here's the split. Comfort versus freedom. Certainty versus range. Everyone is blind somewhere. That's not the problem. The problem is refusing to notice it. If this exercise tightens your chest a little, if something in you wants to push back, that's not weakness. That's awareness trying to break through habit. Ego wants closure. Intelligence wants room. Schopenhauer understood this quietly. The wisest person isn't the one with answers. It's the one who can feel the size of what they don't know. And the most dangerous position isn't ignorance. It's ignorance that feels complete. So here's the open question. When certainty feels safest, will you choose to protect it or test it? Because one path keeps you comfortable. The other keeps you alive to reality. And the choice doesn't announce itself. It shows up as discomfort. What you do with that discomfort is where everything changes.